And then I have some questions for our general manager for our open space district on items 5 and items 6. And I wanted to start with item 5. This is a contract for environmental planning and land management for our feedlands, open space district feedlands. And I had a few questions about this funding. First of all, does the funding from these contracts come out of that 10% of the O&M fund to jumpstart the public access?
For the contracts that you're talking about,
Yeah.
no, those are contracts that we fund. Those are ongoing land maintenance activities that we fund out of our operational budget, and they're also approved in your board-approved work plan.
But does it come out of the 10%? Because these are our fee lands. These are the fee lands that were purchased for recreational access. So would that come out of the 10%?
This does not come out of 10%. It's land management that's not associated with recreation.
Okay. Well, so since we're focused on accelerating the transfer of the fee lands purchased for recreation to our partner agency, I was kind of concerned to see that the description of these contractors' qualifications, not one of them emphasizes environmental planning as it applies to recreation or public access. And so that's one of my concerns that I have, is that are we basically hiring these companies for very expensive reporting that's going to make it more difficult for us to transfer these lands?
I'm sorry, what was the question? Is it going to make it more difficult?
Question is, are we hiring, contractors to do extensive onerous reporting and spend a lot of money on it, that it's going to make it more difficult to transfer these lands?
Actually, no, that would be contrary to what we're doing. We're actually hiring contractors to help us on a number of items. You're focusing on one specific area of that contract, which is to help us do resource assessments that help us write conservation easements. Any land that we transfer, it's essential that we have an easement in place that protects the conservation values as identified in our expenditure plan, and I'm sure you would be supportive of us doing that.
Well, I'm absolutely supportive of that, but I guess one of my concerns is that, it's park agencies all throughout the United States, both on a regional, state, and national level, that actually conserve land for the benefit of the public. So my concern is the expenditures. They're very expensive reporting that we're doing, and are we adding an extra layer of bureaucracy that might slow down the transfer of those lands? Because any type of park agency that's going to take that land and develop it is going to have to do their own reporting in terms of CEQA. So isn't that a duplication?
No, absolutely not. Actually, the work that we do, again, I will reemphasize, it helps us write our conservation easement. It's a very different purpose than doing a environmental assessment, let's say under CEQA, an initial study, neg deck, where you're evaluating the environmental impact of a project. That's very different. You're looking at the impacts of, say, a trail, staging area, et cetera, on the environment. In this case, we're actually assessing the entire property to understand what the resources that exist there, and then using that information to help us construct an easement that helps to protect those resources that we want to see protected across the entire property. Environmental assessments that mitigate neg decks, those just really look at a very small subset of a property.
So they're not going to be redundant studies that
no, I don't believe
any
so.
park agency would then have to do if they wanted to do any type of development on that land?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay, well, I guess I would recommend that the Open Space District return us, since these are basically retainers, aren't they? They're retainers to do these reports. There's not specifically spelled out what the contractor is going to do.
Well, we have the types of services that are provided, and then we can go to that contractor and negotiate scopes of work. It's designed to streamline and actually remove bureaucracy from the process.
Well, I think, again, I'm going to recommend that the Open Space District, to make sure that we're not doing redundant reporting and onerous reporting that's going to be an obstacle in terms of expediting the transfer of the lands, that the district would return to us with specific agreements with the consultant that impact these recreational fee lands, to make sure that we don't have redundancy. I guess that's what I'm asking, because it seems like that any type of agreement with a consultant that's going to have this type of reporting should be coordinating with the recreational partner that's going to contribute to the conservation easement, but not just the conservation easement, but also to the park master plan in order to expedite the process of the transfer and not duplicate the work and save taxpayer money. So what I'm asking is for more specifics to come back. Because if we have identified partners for some of these lands, then we should be coordinating these studies with what those partners are to save the taxpayers money and expedite the transfer. That's my recommendation, if the board approves. Just specifics, since these are retainers.
Through the chair?
Yeah.
I think to the extent that there's lands that we are working on that are recreational lands and they'll be transferred, as a part of the study session we can come back, or at some point during the year we can come back and actually identify the steps that are taken on the pieces of land so your board understands it, which includes some of the resource reviews that Mr. Keene just outlined. And so we can talk about how they interface. I know the two departments, Parks and Ag and Open Space, have been trying hard to coordinate so that they don't duplicate efforts and that the work that the Ag and Open Space District does actually adds value to the pieces when we complete the Parks plan. But I think it'd be worth coming back in a study session and really showing your board how we're able to do that.
Okay, and my understanding is that there is some duplication, otherwise I wouldn't be asking these questions today. Okay, let's move on to item number 6. This has to do with our public outing contracts. So I have a few questions for the district trying to get a sense of what it costs for the county to deliver these particular services under this model, which is facilitating public outings on district lands. Now, let me first off say that the contractors which we're contracting with for the public outings are wonderful, wonderful nonprofit agencies, which I fully support, and I have participated in some of those outings. I want to start off by saying that. But I want to make sure that we're using both an effective and cost-efficient service delivery model. And when I first looked at the costs, which is over $15,000 a month for these outings, you know, I was really shocked, given the fact that these are only providing outings for a little over 2,000 people at a huge cost. So I want to take a look at this in terms of what we actually promised to the public under Measure F. So it looks like that the average cost, if you look back for the last 3 years, is about $2,700 per outing. So since the average number of participants was only about 27 people per outing, that's a cost of about $100 per person. So the first question is, did the contractors really exhaust the $700,000 budgeted between 2010 and 2013 for these contracts? Did they exhaust that amount that was put aside?
Well, we anticipate that, yes, the funds that have been set aside and put under contract, those funds will be exhausted. Okay,
that's a lot of money. Expensive outings for a small amount of people. So since one of the goals is to provide outreach to diverse people, do we have records of the outings provided, the number of participants, and other detail in terms of whether we're reaching diverse populations and underserved populations?
When we came to the board for these contracts the last time, one of the stipulations in the contract was reporting. So these contractors do report on their outings, the number of attendees, the types of outings, as well as essentially if we're trying to reach disadvantaged youth, for instance, or Latino populations, that they report on those types of activities. So
we have numbers for all of those. How many Latinos and underserved youth?
We could get that. We could get that for you. Yes.
Okay, I'd like to see that, since it's only a little over 2,000 people. So. Per year. So the other thing too is I looked at the websites of a couple of the service providers to see if there was evidence of the outings that they were provided for on the district lands, and I really couldn't find hardly any detail. And matter of fact, on some of the sites, they didn't even post the data for the previous outings. So what types of checks and balances does the district provide in terms of managing these contracts and making sure that these outings are occurring in a timely way and that there's significant outreach? Because I couldn't find any postings on some of the websites.
We do rely on our contractors to get the word out for their outings. we certainly can check in with them and see how they're doing that. I can check in with the person who's managing the contract. But what we do find is that every single one of these outings is full. They're well attended. They are one of the most popular programs we have at the district. So I believe the word is getting out, but there's social media, there's websites, just one way in which they get the word out. They also have their own newsletters. I mean, and it's different for each entity.
But it's still, if we're looking at these amendments today, which is for a year and 3 months, the actual cost is $236,000. It's not $188 because there's an additional 3 months that have been added to these contracts without any RFP. The cost of the outings is going up to $3,400 per outing, with only a little over 2,000 people. So that's a cost of about $128 per person. How are we going to recover any of these costs? Are the participants paying for the outings? Do they pay us? Do they pay the provider? That's a really expensive
Well, a couple of things.
hike.
I think using just dividing the number of outings by the cost per person and assuming that that your number of 27 per outing, it really varies per outing. I mean, I'll give you an example. I was speaking, one of our staff was speaking with Land Path's representative, and they had one that was scheduled for 100 folks, and they ended up having 500. So I really think it depends. Also, this is a minimum number of outings in here. In some cases, our contractors are able to efficiently run these programs. So this is a low bar threshold, and they exceed that. They actually bring resources to the table and leverage our money.
What's
and in
the
some
resources
cases,
do they bring?
Oh, they've brought dollars. I mean, I've talked with Craig Anderson numerous times about they use the money from the contracts that we let to them and are able to grow that in some cases 4 or 5 times. So,
but the donations are going to the contractors that we're already paying. They're not coming back to the district.
No, we don't get that money back, but in some cases it allows them to do enhanced programs, actually have maybe more people on an outing or even do more outings than they've contracted for.
Well, I understand these contracts.
So then the price goes down
They're
per
very
head.
lucrative contracts is my point, Mr. Keene, and very, very lucrative contracts. At $15,000 per month for these outings that only benefit a very small number of people. I know they're a huge benefit to the contractors. I'm trying to understand what the return of the investment is for our taxpayers who want to have access to these lands.
Let me give you that. I think the return on investment is quite simple. It's an opportunity to, one, show the really great work that the district does. This is done through various kinds of outings. I mean, we've got outings that, like for instance, the Dogbane Preserve, which highlight the Native American use of the property. We've got outings on agricultural easement lands where our RCD is out there. We're leveraging their relationships with landowners and our relationships, and they're out there showing how our district protects agriculture. I mean, we have a variety of outings, and I also think it's important to note that your board, this is our way of getting the community connected to the land, in particular on some of these fee lands which are not yet open. It's a way to get the public out there. Your board could change your mind on this. If it's not a program and you don't think it's cost effective, your board can eliminate it. That's really a policy question. But at this point, in our board approved work plan, we've been given direction to move forward with it. And I think it's a good program. I stand behind it. But if you have concerns about the cost of it, we have our providers. Some of our providers are here, and I think they'd be happy to come and speak to what goes into an outing. They're the ones who are on the ground doing it.
I don't think that's necessary, but my concern is that this has become a long-term strategy because it's taken too long to transfer properties, and it's not cost-effective. I mean, I think the public has a right to know that we're spending almost $16,000 a month on these outings. And by the way, I'd like to hear why it's going up by $700 per outing for another 15 months with no RFP. So this has become a long-term strategy instead of, and meanwhile, we're taking far too long to transfer these properties. 2,000 people a year at a cost of $3,400 an outing, that's a really, really expensive program. And it seems to me that it would be better that we invested that money, which is close to $1 million now over a period of 3 years, into expediting the transfer of these lands, since that has been a direction of this board. So, can you what can you tell us about the $700 per outing increase with no RFP?
Well,
next 15 months.
First off, in the board item, we explain the reasoning behind doing this 15-month extension, so we can line it up with our education contracts and actually come back and look at both of those programs, see what's working, see what's not working, and see what enhancements we'd like to make to that. With regards to look, we ask for the cost to do the work. This is coming from our contractors. They submit the costs. And if you want to bring them up and ask them about their costs and why they've gone up, I'm happy to ask them to come up. But
so
we don't prepare those costs.
We're not negotiating this because this isn't a new RFP. It's an extension of a 3-year RFP. You're asking us to increase these outings by $700 an outing for the next 15 months, an extension of an RFP that actually is supposed to be coming to an end. So I'm just interested why we're increasing these by $700 an outing.
Well, if I may, because we're on consent calendar, I appreciate the passion and the inquiry, and certainly we want to watch out for every dollar that's out there and every policy question. I think the board and the chair and the staff work diligently to figure out what's going to be on consent, what's going to be on regular, and coming up with a list of criteria. And I know that staff knows this well as well. This item, I believe, in years past, is consistent with adopted board policy. It's more or less a routine item in and of itself. Certainly the questions are warranted in terms of the making sure that we're getting the biggest bang for the dollar, but in terms of the policy direction, I think that's been made and move forward. I would propose that we leave the item on consent and come back to the board in July with an additional presentation to go through these, just like the first item. And I think that we're overdue, as our discussions in the past have talked about, whether it's the 90-10 split and what that entails and what it doesn't entail, in terms of the nuance of the lands, on that particular piece. In my mind, the recreational land fee lands, the nuance is that the lands were purchased, in my opinion, by the Agricultural Preservation and Open Space District for the purpose of preserving the land as outlined in the expenditure plan and what the voter-approved measure dictates. And that CEQA analysis is different than a project that would be undertaken by a park district to put in capital improvements for initial public access. And in fact, I think it complements one another, because I think you're right, the general manager, that one looks at the entire land from an environmental perspective and then figures out where and what can we do with this piece of land in terms of opening it to the public in a safe way that is consistent with what the Agricultural Preservation and Open Space District's expenditure plan and policies are. I think that we need to have these discussions. I know that we've talked about them in the past about coming back. I think this particular item, again, I think if we didn't provide access to these sites, we would be criticized as well. It's a little bit of a conundrum. I agree that some of the, making sure that we can get the maximum amount of people out to the lands for the minimum amount of dollars is always going to be where we want to take off, but it doesn't necessarily always happen that way. You can't force people to go out onto the lands. You can only make the opportunities available to them. I think to me, that's what this item is really all about. And if it's okay with the rest of the board, I'd like to leave the item on consent and come back to the board in July with a further opportunity for discussion when we don't have 76 items. And
I would like the request of two things.
Sure.
I'd like the justification for the increase from the general manager of $700 per outing, because there's no extension, there's no new RFP here. This is an extension of a 3-year contract by 15 months. And then I want to see who we're actually reaching out of these 2,000 people, because if the goal is to reach diverse populations, I'd like to see the data for that.
Just a clarification, when you say return to the board, is it to talk about the outings? Is that the
outings, we can work out on the, I think this subject probably needs more discussion.
Okay.
But I do want to leave it on consent today and move forward. But I think that we obviously have some other concerns and questions. And